I guess to lead into it, the loose concept for the record, or I guess not loose, but the concept for the record is that essentially it's a book of published short stories or poems or unpublished that deal with stories that don't necessarily involve the narrator character, the author. So that's kind of a confusing way to put it. So there's two things going on throughout the whole record. There's the first thing is that there are the stories or poems, whatever you want to call them, that tell individual stories that don't necessarily involve the author, at least not as a principal character. So there's those stories, but then throughout them there are, I guess, what are essentially very personal annotations that show why the author chose to tell those stories, why they stuck with him, why they were impactful, and why he felt the need to put them down on paper, I guess. Well, yeah, so there's two things going on. The one, there's the stories contained within this book of published whatever. And then throughout those stories, there are the author's annotations that kind of weave everything into one single narrative. So they show why the author felt that those stories were relevant or worth telling, and how they connect to the traumatic instance in the author's life, the instance that he finds himself most often discussing and dwelling on. And the first track on the record, Archer One, is meant to be kind of an introduction to all those themes. One, it's meant to be an introduction to that loss, to that kind of ambiguous tragedy in the individual's life, which is referred to pretty often, but never very directly, never in a way that tells exactly what had happened. As far as the loss is concerned, what that exact loss was, like, it's pretty obvious that it was a person, but whether or not it was, a death or a breakup or a moving on, and then what that person's relationship was to them exactly is never fully formed. It's kind of up to the listener to decide. But Archer One is meant to be kind of the first. It's not a story. It's a separate letter written on the dedication page or on one of the blank inserts in the book itself that kind of goes through everything. It discusses that loss. It explains in a way the whole concept of the record, even to the point where, like, at the end of the song, there's a lyric that says, it's all there in the pages ahead of here. Then there's the line that says, first the feeling of abandonment, which references the next three songs, and then trying to cope, which references two songs in the middle of the record, and then death and hope in the thing itself, which covers the rest of the record, the last section of stories, as well as kind of the two conclusions that appear later on in the record. So really, more than anything, the first track is to introduce the character, to introduce the primary conflict, which is that loss, and then also to introduce the whole structure of the record. That line, in the song, where he starts to debate whether or not he's, going crazy, and his grounds for believing that he's losing it in some way, is that he thinks too much about death. And I think that is part of the reason that that's there, is it shows how deeply that loss has affected him, where he's applying that to himself, and then also to a lot of the stories that show up later. Yeah, absolutely. The death theme is the whole thing about a complete life and finding purpose, and that's what a lot of the record deals with as well. It's searching for that reason to be in anticipation of an additional loss or some other tragedy befalling you, or death, or something that interrupts that possibility. So I think in some ways that is a theme that comes up throughout the record, and pretty much in every one of the stories, and then also in the letters in between and the annotations throughout.